Hi, welcome to UpTop Solar. My name is Gwendolyn Espy, and I will be walking you through the Solar 101 series. In this video, we will be going over selecting a grid tie inverter. Although our main focus will be grid tie inverters, we will still go over the two main types of systems. Then we will review the results from a load analysis that we did in a previous video. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out. After that, we will answer the question, what are our solar goals? This answer will guide us to decide what type of system we should be getting. Following that, we'll do a tour of a couple of inverter specifications so that you're more comfortable looking at them because they can be a little daunting if you haven't seen them before. Then finally, we will choose an inverter. So let's get started. Grid tie inverters convert DC from the PV panels into suitable AC power for household loads or injecting back into the grid. There are no batteries in this type of system. These inverters use the grid as a voltage source, and they are effectively current sources. They are not voltage sources. Grid tie inverters convert DC power from the PV module into suitable AC power for household loads or injecting back into the grid. There are no batteries in this type of system. It uses the grid as a voltage source. Grid tie inverters are effectively current sources, not voltage sources. For that reason, and other safety reasons, when the grid is down, the PV system is also down. These systems are cheaper, simpler, they have less components, and they lower the bill. There is, however, no backup capability. Battery-based systems consist of two converters. The first one is a DC to DC converter. That's this first one right here that I'm circling with my mouse. This is from PV to batteries. The second one is a DC to AC converter, and that's this one right here. This goes between the batteries and the home, so this is your inverter. A battery-based inverter uses battery voltage to power it up. That means when the grid is down, the PV system uses the batteries to power up the backup loads. This type of system gives you independence, backup abilities, and still lowers your bill. However, it is more expensive, more complicated, and there are more components involved. We went over this in a previous video, but we'll quickly review it. Here is an example of a day of energy with solar. We have our solar harvest here in the center, represented by this bell curve. Then we have this dark profile, which is our load profile. This is how many kilowatts you might use at any point of the day. Then we have our maximum power demand. This is our peak power demand that we had this day. We learned about how to do a load study or a load analysis in a previous video. Here's an example of a load analysis. My max power or peak demand is 3,411 watts. This is a number we will use to choose the right size inverter. Before we move forward, we need to assess, why are we doing solar? Is your goal for backup? If so, then you will need batteries and a small battery-based system. Is it to make your bills cheaper? If so, then a lower cost grid tie system will do the job. Are you thinking about being more independent and going off grid? If this is your goal, then you'll need a larger battery-based system with a large amount of energy storage. This is an important decision now because when you choose, for example, a grid tie system, you can't just add batteries to it later for most models out there today. If you have a grid tie system and then later you decide you want batteries, you'll have to purchase a whole new system. This is why knowing what you want now and in the future will save you a lot of headache and money later. There are some manufacturers designing battery-based inverters that can act as a grid tie system, which you can add batteries later. Keep an eye out for those, but they are far and few in between. What are the specifications to look out for an inverter? First thing is power capacity. We did our load analysis and we need about 3.4 kilowatts. I know that we have a 240 volt system at my house. I know I have 240 volts at the house. This Sunny Boy 3.8 240 volt version will work since it has 3,800 watts available. So this will meet our needs as an inverter. Some inverters will also have surge capability. It can sustain higher power for 1 to 5 milliseconds, for example. It looks like this inverter doesn't specify that, but that's okay because it already meets our requirements, which was to meet at least 3.5 kilowatts. And this inverter is a 3.8 kilowatt inverter. Now we'll touch a little bit on battery-based inverters. The specifications is similar to a grid tie inverter, except the battery voltage portion. If you want a 48 volt system, you have to make sure the inverter can work at 48 volts. Let's look at an actual specification together. This is the Sunny Boy. This goes from 3.0 to 7.7. This type of naming convention is pretty standard, and it usually means about 3 kilowatts. So this will provide about 3 kilowatts of power, 3.8 kilowatts of power, etc. And the reason they do this too is because they normally share a lot of the same specifications. There's just a few tweaks between each model. We'll just focus on the 3 main categories, which is the input, which we will actually ignore right now because that's more on the PV side, and I have another video on that. The output, and then the efficiency. Let's just focus on the output. When I did my load analysis, it was about 3.4 kilowatts that I needed. This inverter is a 3.8 kilowatt inverter at 240 volts, so that will meet my requirement, my needs. The AC voltage range, this gives you what range it will operate at. It should be pretty close to 240, but there's some give for that. And I'm in the US, so I have 60 hertz. So this will work for 60 hertz or 50 hertz. 50 hertz is used in Europe and some other countries as well. We have our power factor, our output phases, and harmonics. The second portion is efficiency. Efficiency becomes important when you want to put an appropriate amount of power on the array so that you have an expected output, because you're not going to get 100% of that power on a roof to your home. There's going to be some efficiency loss. So that you want to use that number when you calculate that. Now we'll just touch on a battery-based inverter. This is the Outback Power Radiant A series. This is very similar to a grid tie inverter. However, it is a battery-based inverter. You will have specifications that are particular to batteries, which could be charging, voltage, etc. Let's take a look here. The important part right now is power that we are sizing our system. We want to make sure we choose an inverter that will meet that requirement. We have our continuous power ratings. This is the power that it can output continuously. Like I mentioned before, some inverters can provide more power for a short period of time, and it looks like this inverter can do that. It has a 30-minute rating, a 5-second rating, and a 100-millisecond rating. Let's see if I can zoom in more. All right, it looks like this inverter is also a split phase, so it's 120, 240, 60 hertz. You can program it to 50 hertz. We have our efficiency ratings, and let's go a bit to the left here. And we have some of the battery portion, battery specifications. So we have our maximum charge output, DC voltage range, looks like 40 to 64. I think this is a 48 volt So the nominal input voltage is 48 volts. So if you want to have a 24 volt system, this would not meet that requirement. This has to have 48 volts on it. I won't go over everything. I just wanted to quickly review what this specification looks like and how it differs from a grid tie inverter. That wraps up selecting a grid tie inverter. We learned what information to use from our load study to select an inverter. We also quickly looked at some inverter specifications. My name is Gwendolyn Espy, and thank you for joining me.